It probably comes as no surprise to you by now that I have a keen interest in arcade gaming, and in my opinion, when it comes to games made for this format, Konami were regularly pumping out some of the greatest ever made over the early 90s. The game we are looking at today, Sunset Riders, is a perfect example of the quality experiences the company would deliver to consumers. In today's video, we are going to be taking an in-depth look at the history of this Western themed run and gun, look at what it offers players, and why, despite being now close to 30 years old, that it still remains such an important iconic game. So ladies and gentlemen, I am the Top Hat Gaming Man, aka Big Daddy Top Hat, and this is the mad story of Sunset Riders, Konami's Wild West themed game. Yeah! Or should I say, yeehaw. It is no secret that the Western movie genre was one of the most popular ever witnessed in Hollywood. In the 1940s through to the early 70s, these movies absolutely dominated the big screen and were distributed far and wide, way past the realms of just the USA. These movies captivated moviegoers by giving the viewers the opportunity to be transported to different times and places, witnessing stories of showdowns at high noon and masked horsemen robbing steam locomotives. There was a huge cultural demand to showcase the impact of the new frontier of America. These style movies were created in mass, even resulting in many of them being produced over in Europe instead, often on the cheap by Italian directors, ultimately being labelled with the term spaghetti western, or apparently macaroni westerns to the Japanese. Now, I have seen a lot of theories thrown around online with regards to the decline of the western, relating to ideas such as a loss of nostalgia for a certain way of life, or the conquering of native people. However, personally, I think the fall of the genre is simply down to oversaturation, and people getting bored, and genres such as sci-fi coming into their own during the 70s, resulted in movies such as Star Wars. This era also featured the birth of video games, which all ended up being frickin' space themed too. Young boys no longer wanted to be cowboys when they grew up, they wanted to be astronauts instead. A tale told fantastically within Toy Story. Interestingly, when we look at the 70s and early 80s, the space genre in gaming seemed to have a similar effect to the Western genre in Hollywood. Titles like Space Invaders and Asteroids dominated the market, but it would not be long before people got sick of them too. Due to video games becoming popular after the fall of the Western, this has always meant that games of such a theme have never been as common as many others, which has helped games in the modern era such as Red Dead Redemption 2 stand out greatly from the pack, letting people experience the Old West in whole new, modern, exciting ways. In fact, we have seen some great examples of this over the years. Wild Gunman, for example, it let players feel like actual cowboys by physically drawing a gun against their opponents. We had Mad Dog McCree, which was another light gun game, which this time immersed players with a full motion video experience. And my favourite of the bunch, the fantastic run and gun known as Sunset Riders. Thinking about it, examples of great Western themed titles have often popped up here and there over the years, meaning the Western is far from dead in the world of gaming. With regards to Sunset Riders, the game was released in 1991 by Konami. This was the same era they were pumping out multiple fantastic brightly coloured 4-player beat-em-ups, such as the Turtles games, Simpsons and X-Men, all of which we have taken in-depth retrospective looks at previously. In fact, 6-player cabinets existed for the X-Men game too, but now we are going off subject. Anyway, Sunset Riders, although being a run and gun that handles similar to Contra, which was released by the company previously, the game, like all the classic beat-em-ups from the era, was available to play on cabinets featuring controls of up to 4 players, thus meaning a whole group could enjoy this game cooperatively. Ye bloody ha! These 4 characters are first shown off in the game's introductory sequence, featuring characters with memorable names such as Billy, Bob and Steve. Very imaginative, eh? These gentlemen are all bounty hunters, which means at the beginning of each stage, the game shows you a wanted poster for a boss you must defeat at the end of every level, who we shall obviously discuss more about very soon. Focusing more on the playable characters, their most easily distinguishable differentiating feature is the colour of the clothes they wear. However, I can provide you with a little more depth than that. Out of the 4 we have Billy Cool, a bounty hunter who looks like a prototypical cowboy wielding a revolver, Steve, another hunter with a revolver, Bob, a hunter with a rifle, and Kumano Wild, a hunter who has a double-barrel shotgun and a Mexican poncho. Rather fittingly, this game was first showcased to the world at the Las Vegas Entertainment Expo out in the Nevada desert. The perfect setting really for something cowboy themed. In terms of controlling this game, it plays exactly as you would expect from looking at it. Moving and aiming is achieved through the 8-directional joystick, whereas the 2 buttons are reserved for shooting and jumping. Simple stuff. Mechanically, players can also use the jump function between the 2 floors that are often scattered throughout this experience. Obviously the goal is to try and make it through the 8 stages, taking as few bullets as possible. However, power-ups and bonus items can be found within doorways to help players along the way. Some enemies are even carrying power-ups in sacks, which can be procured by defeating them. There are even mounted Gatling guns that can be accessed in the final throws of the game. So now we have gone through all of these basics, let's look at the stage design this game can deliver. Before the opening stage begins, players are prompted with a Simon Greedwell wanted poster, offering a reward of $10,000 dead or alive. The stage opens up offering exactly the sort of scenery you would expect in a western game. Old wooden buildings in a dusty setting featuring plenty of wooden doors to hide and enter in and out of. The game shows the player the controls in the early phases, such as how to jump onto a platform above. A power-up will even be gifted from a hooker right at the start, letting the player know they're in for a good time. There are barrels to jump, piles of hay to climb across, some that may conceal enemies, and even horses watching the action from the background. There is a lot going on in this run and gun, including dangerous female enemies with sticks of dynamite, which, if taken down quickly, the dynamite can be used to defeat further opponents. Another cool feature is when a player needs to jump and run across a charging group of bulls. It's all action, action, action in this atmospheric affair. There is water to wade through, like in Contra, and even a bit of platforming involving the second wave of bulls. Greedwell must be taken down at the end of the stage, who does not prove too tough even though he is the one with the high ground. Next to freezing carbonite is Hawkeye Hank Hatfield, in a stage involving riding a horse along the side of a train track. In this fast-paced stage, enemies must be taken out on horse who emerge from the background and foreground, followed up with enemies who drop obstacles from the back of a wagon. Soon a train starts passing the player on a track behind, which of course features a range of enemies to take out who pop up from the windows and other areas of the train. The boss fight against Hawkeye takes place at the station after demounting the horse. Hawkeye must be taken out as he dodges and dives behind barrels in the background. Also, if you look very carefully on this stage, a nice Easter egg is present, featuring one of the Hero Turtles, which is a nice nod to some of Konami's other arcade games. Players are then brought to a simple bonus stage where they can earn additional points by shooting outlaws as they pop up. Rudimentary stuff. The next bounty is on Dark Horse, which sees characters returning to another town section full of saloons and good time girls. The best way to describe the area is like a bigger version of the opening stage. I like all the subtleties too this game includes, such as window smashing. All the minor details count. Dark Horse must be defeated by jumping on the platform above and shooting him below, before moving on to the Smith brothers, who look like they could be related to me. The next stage is a literal short boss fight against the Smiths inside a saloon, who once defeated means the cabaret girls are rescued, treating the player to an exotic dance. Ooh. After seducing the player character, the girls ask the character to go after Sir Richard Rose, bringing the player to the next stage, which takes place aboard a moving train. There are some hairy moments here, for example a bit where the player must jump between carriages after they have been disconnected, but it's all pretty standard run and gun stuff that looks similar to what we saw on stage 2, only without a horse this time and being aboard the actual train. A boss fight takes place against El Greco, one of Richard Rose's henchmen. This Mexican outlaw has a shield to deflect shots, along with a whip to deal damage with. A fun Easter egg here is that if you play through as Cormano, when he tosses his red sombrero away after the fight, Cormano catches it and wears it for the rest of the game. On to stage 6, the boss of this stage is an opponent named Chief Scalpin. This stage seems to take place in either mountains or a canyon, as the player shoots tons of indigenous people, as you jump from ledge to ledge, ascending upwards. There are rickety breakable bridges like in Contra, and even a lift section of the stage as the players move past many totem poles. Chief Scalpum is an expert in knife throwing, but as we know, sharp native objects are no match for guns. At the end of the boss fight, a weird scene occurs where the chief's sister emerges and tells the player not to kill her brother, as he is only following orders, so the player character decides not to. Still though, it seems a tad unfair to me that the chief's whole tribe got shot, yet he gets an out, just because he is in a higher position of power. His sister could have said they were only following orders before all of her people were massacred. What sort of message is this trying to send out to gamers? Let me know what you think in the comments. Stage 7 is beautiful as players pursue Paco Loco, as the player character rides horseback through a wonderful flowing body of water through a woodland area. The stage offers beautiful fast-paced gameplay featuring a range of enemies to take out along the way. Paco Loco stands atop a defensive wooden barrier and must be shot from below by the player. After the player uses dynamite to destroy the wall, it's onwards into the fortress to find and defeat Richard Rose. The final stage involves the player taking advantage of every skill they have learned on foot throughout the game, and even get to take advantage of the Gatling gun I mentioned at the start of the video. There are some awesome cool sections such as ascending the wheel of a mill and continuous use of the Gatling gun to take out enemies and destroy more barriers. After finally ascending the mountain and running the gauntlet, you appear at Sir Richard Rose's mansion. He is protected by multiple henchmen, and you must even destroy statues until he has nowhere left to run and hide. When finally defeated, his rose symbolically flies up into the air, signalling the end of the game. The game's credits roll, showing off some really cool reflection effects, the likes of which we also saw used in other Konami games such as Rocket Knight Adventures and Castlevania Bloodlines. Some wonderful stuff. So that's pretty much everything you can see in the arcade version of this game. It's fast paced, it's action packed, and there is pretty much something new to see at all times. It really is a wonderful little game that offered a lot for a title from 1991. Whilst many Konami arcade classics never made it to home consoles, such as the Simpsons and X-Men arcade game, which we can only assume must have been for licensing reasons, fortunately Sunset Riders would be ported to both the Sega Megadrive and the Super Nintendo. So let's see how the consoles of the 16-bit wars handled this game and how each vary from the game's original incarnation. On the Super Nintendo, as you can see, the game was massively graphically scaled back, with much of the game's finer details being lost in the process. Still though, the game looks pretty good and still offers a very strong Super Nintendo experience. In fact, Sunset Riders for the platform is often considered one of the must-own titles for the system. 4-player cooperative play was obviously scaled back to 2-player action, but one of the most striking changes is how conservatively the women dress in the Nintendo version of this game. Check out this scene for example, and how differently the women are dressed in each. In fact, Konami did not seem to want to show any women actively involved in the action in this game either, and the female sprites who throw dynamite were taken out of the game and replaced with men, because I guess seeing an armed man get shot to death is more tasteful than seeing an armed woman get shot to death. Someone explain to me how this is any different at all. In a change that I do agree with, Konami did make changes to the stage where you shoot hundreds of natives down, changing them to actual bandits, meaning that in the scene where the chief's sister saves him, explaining that he was only following orders, it feels better and actually makes sense sparing him this time around, as he was not complicit in the genocide of his own people. So well done Konami on fixing that strange bit of the game. Oh yeah, in the Nintendo version of the title, his name was also changed to Chief Wigwam because reasons. On the Sega Megadrive, the game saw a lot more changes with the release on the platform than the likes of the version of the Super Nintendo, all in all resulting in the game being scaled back much further than its Nintendo counterpart. The Megadrive version of the game did arrive on the market 7 months earlier though, so Sega fans got to play this game at a much earlier date than Nintendo owners. In this version, only 2 of the previous playable characters are included in this one, in the form of Billy and Kumano. The controls in the game were tweaked to suit the Mega Drive's 3-button layout, adding an extra shooting button. Basically, pressing one allows a player to walk and shoot at the same time, while the other shoot button keeps the character still when pressed down, allowing the player to change their aim only. As you can see, the graphics were scaled back even further in the Mega Drive game than the likes of the SNES game, and the music no longer sounds like that found in the arcade, and instead features music that was typical tinny sounding Mega Drive music, which is to be expected on the system. The game's biggest loss though is that the game's content has basically been slashed in half with this one. Half of what was included in the arcade game stage-wise is now missing in action here. Basically, this version features 4 of the game's original 8 stages and instead has those 4 divided into 2 to create the illusion of still having 8 stages, if that makes sense. One of these stages does see the player back to killing the natives though. I guess no one had pointed out to them yet that the stage lacked taste and didn't really make sense, but I guess at the very least this section of the game is more faithful to that of the arcade original, so I guess it depends what you prefer. Still though, the original 4 stages that were included have been fleshed out, and instead somewhat lead to some completely new sections being included in this title too. Finally, the game also has a versus mode, where players must shoot each other until one of the players run out of health. So I guess at least Konami did something in response to the lack of arcade content found in this version. All in all though, there is no denying that all 3 versions of the game are amongst the very best on their respective platforms, which would result in the games being well received by journalists on release, and in equal measures being appreciated many years later retrospectively too. Nintendo Life, for example, summarised this perfectly by stating Sunset Riders is bright, colourful, fantastically well animated with superb music and sound. It understands its place as a Western game within the run and gun genre by combining imaginative characterisation and humour with well-paced action set pieces, plus variety in its gameplay. Retro Game Age offers similar praise too a few years back, stating Sunset Riders remains a fun romp that still presents some challenge to get through, and it's just as fun to play now as it was almost 20 years ago. For me personally, I totally agree with the modern view with regards to how special this game is. The game's colours, premise and atmosphere all make it stand out from other games on the market at the time, as 1991 certainly was not the height of the Western genre's overall popularity. So although Western themed movies have not been that popular in my lifetime, Western games have certainly contributed their fair share of offerings and classics in terms of fine quality media, and Sunset Riders, in my opinion, is one of the very best of the whole bunch when it comes to this niche. Thinking about it, due to the fact that this run and gun, particularly in the arcades, delivered on every level, it really does fully deserve to receive the level of hype and attention it now gets today. The game is special and should be remembered as fairly important. It is definitely one of the greatest Western games ever made. So ladies and gentlemen, that was the mad story of Sunset Riders. Let me know your thoughts down below on today's video, and which games you would be keen to see me cover in the future. Which run and guns do you think deserve showcasing on here? This topic was kindly chosen by the fantastic people who back this channel on Patreon, who wonderfully offer me the privilege to be able to pursue making these videos for you full time. If you want to help out, every little helps, and as an incentive you can vote on future content and access every video before I publish them on the channel for as little as just $1 a month. Just think, if every viewer invested $1 a month on this channel, I could afford 1,000 monkeys working at 1,000 typewriters. They could write the greatest videos known to man. It would be the blessed of times, it would be the blessed of times. Yeah. Massive thank yous go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, Hale Paulo Lopez, Joseph Rasnick, Doug Perkins, Rowan Dinch, Evan Balder, Philip Mampf, Camberambo82, A Murder of Crows, Azrael Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Prince Knight, Michael Cullix, A Go, Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angel Light 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Carlos Domingos, SpongeMatt B, Glenny Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Instant Gratification Monkey, James Bishop, JB, PostDXL, Michael Hall, Barbara Kitty, Ron Studd, Chesty LaRue, Langston Miller, Noob, Casey Wright, Zai, Brian Barry, Salagni, Chris Margarine, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Lamik Renee, Sarai H. Al Sarai, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cool, Punky Doodster, Matthew Windle, Adrian Hannington, Bernard Ng, Marco Soto, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Jazzy Tay, Crazy Yell, Master Jinx, Hans Christian, Time Lord Soundwave, Dan Van Dam, Adam Castin, Gregory Smorajewicz, Rick67, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Ball, Angry Little SOB, Mike Bruno, Andis Reinsbergs, Chris Fisk, Ivan M, Paul Elliott's Me Machine Dean, Antonio Rodriguez, Dan Barlow Jr., Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, RetroVers.com, Synth Spaces, Andrew Bezansky. Thank you very much everyone for helping me out. So I guess now it is to infinity and beyond. Cheerio.